Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Maludi Gracia. I'm a member of the Nexus marketing team and your moderator for today's panel session. Our topic today is fundraising in faith based communities, best practices. Really looking forward to this conversation, but as usual, before we jump in, I do have some quick logistics to cover. NXUnite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing. The NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting relationships and serve as a hub for connection in the mission driven sector. As you saw in our video on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cost driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks with me here today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. At any time during the panel, feel free to submit your questions via the questions tab, or you can drop them in the chat. We already have a few questions submitted via registration, but we will prioritize those that we receive from the live audience. If at any point you're having any technical difficulties, my colleague Anton will be in the chat as the Team NXUnite username, ready to assist you the best he can. I also wanted to share that this panel is being recorded. So for those of you watching live, the recording will be sent to your email after the session ends. People can also continue to register and access the recording after the panel. So if you have any friends in the industry you want to share this panel with, simply send them that same registration page and they will be able to access the recording. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I do want to thank you all for attending this panel, whether you're joining us live or watching the recording. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us to learn from these outstanding experts who I will now finally introduce. I'd like to first introduce Bill Tenney Brittain, who is an author, church leadership coach, and church consultant. He has been a successful church pastor and church planter for more than 40 years and was recruited into church consulting early in his career because of his success. Bill helps pastors in stuck churches become their congregation's church growth catalyst so they can spend less time managing members and more time transforming lives and growing their church. Great to have you, Bill.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right. Also with us today is Bond Lammy, who is the executive partner of Philanthropic Council at BWF. Her area of expertise is on building major and principal gift programs, including developing strategies to convert base and mid level donors to major and transformational donors, and designing programs in support of an expanded relational fundraising business model. Great to have you, Bond.
Happy to be here.
Of course. Also with us today is Karen Houghton, who is the CEO and founder of Infinite Giving, an automated investment platform bringing a better investing experience to nonprofits. She advocates for organizational sustainability through better financial management. By hedging against inflation, lowering endowment fees, and growing their asset giving, nonprofits can do more good work and help us all have stronger, healthier communities. Great to have you, Karen.
Hey, good to be here.
And finally, with us today is Linda Peavy, who is the owner of LeapHav Consulting, a marketing, grant writing, and communications firm. With over 21 years of marketing experience as a nonprofit consultant, she has provided services for more than 6 denominations and numerous organizations. She secured funding and business development for over $17 million for nonprofit organizations. So glad to have you, Linda.
Very glad to be here this morning.
All right, now it's finally time to hear from our panelists. And Bond, I'll have you start us off with the first question. How is fundraising within the faith based organizations and communities different from secular settings?
Thank you so much. Happy to get started with this question. In my work, I work with a lot of NGO organizations that have a faith background, some that might still directly be tied to a specific denomination, some that have a Christian mission or a different kind of religious mission, and some that used to be tied to an organization in terms of religion, but aren't so much directly anymore. And one of the things I've noticed in these projects that's different from other organizations I work with is there's kind of that tension between regular and recurring tithing and expectation of giving, and it just being the culture of giving as a part of your faith background, and also wanting to remain modest and not appear to be too ostentatious with giving. So navigating those conversations, particularly in the context of ultra high net worth individuals or significant transformational gifts for organizations, can sometimes be challenging and get around issues of how we engage in discussing stewarding our resources as individuals and as communities of faith.
Thanks, Mond. All right, Linda, I'm going to bring the same question over to you. How does fundraising in faith-based organizations differ from secular settings?
Well, in my world, I work with grants. So I find that I'm always educating the faith based community that grants should be an option for them. Oftentimes, there is still a misnomer that there's no grant money, right? That if you're a faith based organization, if you're a church, you cannot get grants. So I'm always educating the faith based community that one, yes, there are grants available for you, but two, there is a very specific way in which you need to reach out and present your program. So, for example, there are many, many foundations that, yes, they do not give to any faith based organization as long as they are providing any type of faith teaching in the program. However, I've worked with churches, for example, with daycare centers, where within that daycare center, even though it's housed within a church, they are not teaching doctrine. And therefore, they are eligible for many of the regular grants that we see available. So it's about really being able to teach the faith based community how to go about being eligible for grants.
Wonderful. Thanks, Linda. Bill, over to you. How does fundraising in faith-based organizations differ from secular settings?
Well, good responses from our panelists so far, and folks in the church world. There are grants out there, and don't turn your back on them. Start looking for them because they are there. But one of the main differences that between secular and the church world and congregational world, whether you're Christian or Jewish or whatever, that the bottom line is you have a captive audience virtually every Sunday, that you get to pitch your message and your vision and et cetera. And that is something that the secular audience does not get. They don't have that captive audience. The problem so often is that we kind of fumble that opportunity, and we lean towards, hey, you need to give because we are suffering from, our budget's down, or there's not enough giving, or we can't do enough ministry, or we just, tout a couple scriptures and say, there you are, you ought to give. And we, the secular world, we could learn a lot from them on how they, talk to their secular or to their audiences about mission, vision, change lives, talking positive about it. And, so there's a number of differences, but there's a lot of similarities, or I should say there should be more similarities between the way the non-church world and the congregational world approaches financing. I mean, Bond mentioned tithing, which is largely ignored by the average member in the church. I mean, the very small number of people tithe. Teaching it is great. Teaching people to give because their dollars are making a huge difference in people's lives, that's the right direction.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. All right, Karen, over to you. How can fundraising in faith-based organizations differ from secular settings?
I mean, at a high level, I think there's more similarities as well, just like Bill mentioned, right? Nobody's in nonprofit work without a specific calling and without a desire to do good, right? And we serve churches, we serve temples, we serve charities, schools. So we serve any nonprofit entity. And so I see a lot of that where we're just pulled by that mission. I think when it's a faith-based organization, perhaps there's a little extra layer there of required stewardship and accountability. Because when God's ordaining something, or it's truly a calling from a higher power, right? Then I think it's something that you feel more convicted about. I think you're to Bill's point, you're on a Sunday, on a Saturday, right? You're in that world with like-minded people, and there is ideally that expectation of giving. But I think, again, just like all of the panelists have said, there is a different story to tell, and faith-based communities are not always as good at telling the story because it is more of that expectation. Well, in this faith-driven community, we're supposed to give. That's a calling. It's a, you know what I mean? And that's something that we should be compelled to. But I think that as nonprofit leaders, we have the responsibility to share the story in a way that is compelling, rather than, yes, our homes need new roofs, churches, temples need new roofs, right? Like, we get that, but that's not the story that you want to tell. And I think too times we assume the intrinsic motivation, but I think the extrinsic motivation in giving and following and creating fundraising strategies around that are just as important, and something that we don't always use the same care towards that we could.
Thanks, Karen. All right, we're off to a great start. And Bill, I'll have you start us off with our next question. What are some best practices from other industries, such as higher education, healthcare, or arts, that faith based organizations can adopt or modify to enhance their fundraising efforts?
One of the most disturbing stats that I've seen is that the average faith-based person, average church member, synagogue member, et cetera, they give more money to their alumni association than they do to the church. And by and large, that's because, and a number of studies and interviews have been done, is because they believe that their higher education group is doing better good or more good than their church is doing, which goes back to everything that we all said is, you ought to talk about your story and the successes and the lives you're changing and so on. So some of the things we can learn is, number one, no one gives to a sinking ship. If you say, oh, our finances are tanking and you need to give, why would I think about writing a big check to help bail you out of a sinking ship? I mean, it's other industries, again, whether you get from healthcare or higher education, they're always about, things are great and we're changing lives and da-da-da. No one ever says, hey, you need to give because your school's about ready to go bankrupt, because no one gives to that. The other thing that those industries seem to know that sometimes the church doesn't is that people give to results and they give to vision. They don't give out of obligation. Yes, there are a few people in your church who probably write the check because, it's Sunday and this is my church and I need to write that check. But the majority of people, they give because they see results or hear about results, why we should talk about the stories, and because the church or the organization has a vision. This is where we're going and this is how you can help us get there. So, those are at least two things that we can take from the secular world, the higher education and healthcare, about how to raise funding for our faith-based organizations. Give them something that they want to give to support because of the results and because of where we're going.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. Karen, over to you. What are some best practices from other industries that faith based organizations can adopt?
I'm going to go on the financial side. I'm going to say asset giving. There are too many faith-based organizations who make it really hard for their donors to give. So like Bill's saying, like, they're not telling the right story, because I affirm everything that Bill, you just shared too. And it's like, how do you share the story? And how do you share the story in a way that you're also being seen as a good steward of the funds? You're making it easy for your donors to give. Right. And if you go to any church website and you click on donate and they're saying, great, create a username, create a login. Oh, you want to give a big gift? We're not sure how, but also call the office and then talk to whoever and then go through this whole process. And I think the reason a lot of the high capacity giving goes towards higher ed, right? I mean, Harvard, the $55 billion endowment, they're good. Can we not give them more money? I'm happy for them. But at the same time, it's like, what do we do for these small to mid-sized organizations and faith-based communities and charities who are in our communities doing this really important work? And I think it's they don't ask for endowments. They don't ask for legacy gifts. They're not asking for stock gifts, right? And they're making it very difficult to do so. And when you look at an average online cash gift is $128. An average stock gift is $8,000. An average crypto gift is $10,000. A donation from a donor advised fund grant averages around $12,000. So you're looking at this high capacity giving, but then churches are too often, and faith-based communities often run from a scarcity mindset. And if you're in a scarcity mindset, then you're saying, oh, well, we just got to keep the lights on. And then that becomes the story you're telling. Whereas if you can really step out in faith and choose to have an abundance mindset, I know easier said than done, you do have to keep the lights on, right? But if you can move into an abundance mindset where it's like, you may be small, you may only get one stock gift your first year, but you know what? You're going to set it up and you're going to have the perception that you can handle these larger gifts, that you're going to be a good steward, you're going to make it easy for your donor. And I think by doing that kind of process is where you start to get high asset gifts. And then that's where our growth can come in. And that's where greater storytelling can come in too.
Wonderful. Thanks, Karen. Bond, same question over to you. What are some best practices from other industries that faith-based organizations can adopt?
Sure. I'm going to pick up on Karen's theme, but I'm going to go towards kind of the more recurring lower level gifts instead of that high value asset based giving. When I saw this question, I thought a lot about arts organizations and the membership model that a lot of them have. And I've kind of that idea of getting a recurring gift that's set up around a pledge drive, if you're like a radio station, or around an annual membership, and really making it as easy and seamless as possible for the donor to get that set up, and creating an expectation that that's something that is a lifelong relationship, that they're going to continue to give and to support. And within churches, this is quite common in the sense that we are, if you live in a community, you're probably going to go to that church or that place of worship for many, many years. But we still have, at the churches I've gone to, even, it's an annualized pledge. You're filling out the same form year over year, rather than the expectation that you're just going to continue to give. I worked with a Christian radio station, and the head of membership there that ran their twice a year pledge drives said their focus was on getting credit card information, and the anticipation was they were going to continue giving at that level or increase their giving until Jesus comes. And it was somewhat tongue in cheek in terms of how he was saying it. But the expectation was that this is a lifelong relationship. We understand that what we're providing in terms of the content and the inspiration of our radio station is providing value to you. You can see the impact, and you're investing in that impact. And the expectation is that we're going to, as long as we continue to provide that impact, you're going to continue to invest. That doesn't mean that you should make it challenging for people to cancel if they have financial circumstances or something else in terms of leaving. But I think particularly in kind of a congregation situation, for whatever reason, we treat it as an annualized process. And I've seen a lot of arts organizations in particular really moving away from that.
Thanks, Bond. Linda, what would you like to add in terms of fundraising best practices from other industries? Oh, you're muted.
All right, there we are. So I think one of the mechanisms that other industries use really well is the idea of being able to network and take advantage of external resources through collaborations, through joining various organizations in the community where they're taking advantage of not only community resources, but perhaps those that sit on various board of directors, being able to get references, referrals, right? Really being able to gauge the networking opportunities, whereas the faith-based community, churches tend to look internal, right, for all of their resources and their sole source of funding, whereas other industries do a very, very good job of being able to utilize networking and reaching beyond the obvious and beyond their internal resources to be able to secure funding.
Wonderful. Thanks, Linda. Very quickly, I'd like to remind our live audience to start submitting your questions at any time, and we'll get through them during the second half. All right, here's our next question. And Karen, I'll have you start us off with this one. How can faith based organizations effectively communicate their mission and impact to their constituencies, even when some prefer private and low key giving?
Yeah, no one likes to be hit over the head with the giving ask, for sure. So there's definitely, I understand the sensitivity around that. I think too often what happens is the pendulum swings so far the other way that they're afraid to make the ask, right? And so I think even if you think about purchasing habits, right? And just say, hey, you're scrolling Instagram, and you see ads. You know that on average you need to see an ad about 7 different times before you will actually click purchase. So on another side, if you think about giving, too often, like as we're talking about even annually, if you ask for it one time a year, then you are training all the people who work with you and are served by you and are in contact with you that, hey, we only have to do this one time, right? But if you're then talking about it over and over and over again, it doesn't have to be you got to give, but it's the story you're telling. What framework do you have around that? And then every time you're doing that, you follow it by a little CTA, right? That call to action, which any good marketer will tell you, you always have a call to action, right? And so that means maybe you're doing your monthly newsletter, right? At that bottom, you should always have a donate button, right? And it can say, hey, give here, give this way. But no matter where you put it, if I go to your website and you don't have a big donate button on like that upper right hand corner, you need to do that. So it's all about repetition. And even if it's a soft ask, again, just making sure it's there, it's visible. If you're talking to them, making sure you're asking, oh, do you have a donor advised fund? Did y'all know there's $140 billion sitting in donor advised funds right now? Literally, the donor gets a tax deduction. It sits in the DAF. There's no urgency or reminders for them to give out of that. So really good intended. All you have to do is say, oh, did you have a donor advised fund? Did you know that you can set giving out of this donor advised fund? You can set it recurring if you want. You can make these grant requests. So there's, I think, lots of opportunity to make consistent reminders, clear call to actions, and then also making sure that you're being over about the different easy ways for them to give to you.
Thanks, Karen. Bill, over to you. Any tips on how to effectively communicate mission and impact?
Part of the problem I've found in churches, and apologies for other faith-based, I can't speak cogently about the others necessarily, not my training, sorry, don't know the habits, but part of the problem is that at least in the church, we have treated giving as it's something tawdry. We don't want to talk about money because, again, apologies, but Jesus spoke more about money than anything else besides the kingdom of God. I mean, he talked about wealth. He talked about money. He talked about investments repeatedly. He was on and on and on about it, but he didn't say give, like sometimes we do. He tied it to story. He tied it to parable. He tied it to advice. He tied it to, wise investing versus foolish investing, etc. He wove it into almost everything he did. I think Karen kind of hit it right. We tend to go in a season, October in a lot of churches, where we just pounce on this is our capital campaign or our pledge drive, whatever, and we overwhelm people talking about money. Spread it out, weave it in, talk about it as a part of life. We have a nation that is head over heels. I'm talking about people, not the nation, although it too, head over heels in debt. And we might want to consider offering some debt relief kind of training and how to get out of debt, But again, it's about casting vision, talking about it, in every opportunity we can, again, without pounding over the head, just weave it in. But we got to move from tawdry to this is just a normal conversation. At least that's how I see it.
I love that, because it's ultimately like the culture of generosity and a culture of giving, which should be very natural and organic in a congregation. But when we're fearful or uncomfortable talking about it, then that's where it starts to go wrong. So I love how you're saying that with the vision and that story framework of like, if you just set a culture with consistent kind of opportunities to be generous and talk about giving, I think that's so important, and that's the way to do it.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely true, Karen. Thanks.
Wonderful. All right, Linda, over to you. Any tips on how to effectively communicate mission and impact?
Yeah, so I am really big on using video to be able to demonstrate your impact to a broader community. So, if, for example, you have a ministry within the church where you're feeding the homeless, or you have a food ministry, or you have a computer training uh, industry, right, or ministry within your church, utilize video to show the transformation that's being taken place because of your programming, because of the ministry. So that's the first part. The second part is being able to develop relationships with the media in your particular area, so that you're being able to feed the video and the impact to the community through media, in addition to just pushing them out, whether it's on your website, your newsletter, but being able to showcase the impact that your church is providing, which has a reciprocal effect. Is going to increase your membership, because people see, oh, okay, you are fulfilling your mission. It's going to increase the amount of tithes and donations that you get. But I think too many churches underutilize the opportunity to really showcase the good work that they're doing.
Thanks, Linda. All right, Bond, over to you. Any tips on how to effectively communicate mission and impact?
Yeah, and this is something that Bill touched on a little bit earlier, but that, the thing that's really amazing about faith-based communities and fundraising is you have that captive audience. People are there because they want to be there, because they believe in the mission of the organization, and they believe that your organization can accomplish something that they can't individually, and they feel called to make a difference in that particular area. So I think the theme that I'm hearing from everybody's comments is we don't necessarily have the boldness to believe that our organization is impacting the change that we're actually doing. And some of it is kind of the incremental, right? We are seeing every single day what's happening rather than the cumulative effect. And this is why, if you've got the resources, either paid or volunteer staff, to put together communications that really focus on that impact, really being able to step outside of the day in, day out, and more on a broader perspective, present that impact. Linda, when you were talking about some of the different missions that churches can accomplish, I was thinking about my church has a ministry that's the only food pantry in a particular neighborhood. And that is so impactful. And it is an area that desperately needs that service. There's fresh produce there, right? This is something that impacts the community in a very tangible way. And my pastor is really good about speaking to that, to like community leaders, but thinking about, there's actually people in other parts of this town that would be interested. There's other groups that would be interested in supporting this effort, because having food insecurity in this region of this city impacts other areas as well. So just being able to kind of step back and think about the big picture and present that in a way that people can tie to the amazing work that the Harvards of the world are doing, right? We might not be doing it for hundreds of thousands of people, but we are doing it for our local community, or a community in a different area. As I saw one of the questions, right? We are impacting this service delivery in another country across the world. Being able to tie that to those tangible results, I think, is really the secret weapon that we have.
Bond, one of the things that you said there, and I just want to tie in, and it goes along with Linda's comments as well, is that local secular organizations, if they hear about what the church is doing in a local community, they're willing very often to help support that, but the church doesn't ask. We forget that we become so insular. We forget that we can look out beyond our borders. I know a number of churches that are underwriting significant ministry by the local business owners and profit places that have grants and whatnot, because they want to be a part of this. But they've only done it by the churches have only got there because they did their own marketing and let people know, and then someone made an ask. And we've got to get better, folks, at church at making the ask, because people want to support good things, and generally speaking, that's what we do. So, spot on, Bon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, Linda, here's our next question. In the context of faith based communities, how important is leadership development for successful fundraising, and what strategies can organizations implement to cultivate and empower leaders?
I think the development of the leadership is key, because so often churches don't include fund development even as a part of their strategy, right? As a part of their operations. It's only, they only look at tithing, right? They don't expand beyond that. So to have someone trained to understand, one, that you need a complete fund development plan and a fundraising plan beyond tithing is critical. I know I work with grants. The Lilly Foundation is certainly the largest funder of religious organizations, and oftentimes a lot of their grants require matching funds. A lot of their grants require that a church has a fund development plan. And so to me, being able to train someone right in the church as they are developing ways in which to grow the church, to me, fund development and fundraising and that knowledge needs to be as integral as any other part of looking at the totality of how the church is going to be able to grow. So I think having that kind of training, I have an online grant writing course, something as simple as being able to have someone, whether it's a part of the board or even a volunteer person in the church, know how to write grants, right? That needs to be a part of your strategy. But I think from the beginning, as you look at how you are going to grow the church and grow the ministry, I think the fund development piece is too often missing from churches, but it needs to be a critical component of how the church is going to flourish.
Thanks, Linda. Turning to you, Bond, any advice, or how important is leadership development for successful fundraising, and what strategies can be implemented to empower leaders?
Yeah, this is really critical. I mean, we all know the impact of leadership gaps in terms of efficiencies, be it in program delivery, in fundraising, in administrative functions. Anytime there's a leadership transition at an organization, the organization experiences significant challenges. Going back to kind of the examples from some other industries, we are incidentally seeing that at higher ed institutions, the transition of a president at this point in time in an average 8-year fundraising campaign, it is almost guaranteed that either the head of your fundraising team or the president of the university is going to turn over, or both, as we're seeing in a lot of these. And that, I think, even 5 years ago would have really significantly upended an organization and their fundraising trajectory, particularly in the midst of a campaign. But now it's really not as big of a deal as it used to be. And I think a lot of that is because higher ed in particular has invested in succession planning, has built up these teams, that fund development area that Linda mentioned, to provide that continuity of support, even if somebody in a leadership role isn't there. And I think from a faith-based community perspective, a lot of times we are trying to combine a bunch of different areas together. It's much more likely with an international faith-based NGO that fundraising / marketing / finance / operations, we've got like all of these areas under one person who may or may not ever have had a professional fundraising role because they had expertise in one of those other areas. And we don't necessarily have the underlying support. A lot of like the discovery conversations I have with clients in the NGO space is just trying to figure out who is the person that's doing portfolio management, who is the person that's building your fundraising reports. Sometimes it's somebody over in accounting, right? Like there's all sorts of different ways to think through this. And I don't think that people have to naturally have that background in fundraising, but at least knowing where those resources are that you can go to, subscribing to Chronicle of Philanthropy, becoming a member of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Pew Research Center sends out these amazing reports regularly on Americans' attitudes towards religion or towards philanthropy. Just having those resources, and also I recognize having the bandwidth to be able to devote to that, right? Because if you're doing 5 different jobs at once, you're not going to just sit down and read the Chronicle of Philanthropy in your spare time. So that's something that I do think we're asking people to just do a lot with a very limited amount of time, and we need to work to add more resources and to acknowledge that there's value in adding more resources so that we don't burn out talented people.
Thanks, Bond. All right, Karen, over to you. How important is leadership development and what strategies can be implemented to empower leaders?
Yeah, I love what everyone's been saying. I think ultimately at a high level, we should always be providing leadership training to everybody, right? I mean, whether it's mentorship, like how we even define leadership, especially in faith-based communities, I think we don't want to be dependent on one person, right? I think it is teams of people that make us successful. It is the development team often is the one doing a lot of the work, and then they're not always connected with the bigger mission or vision that's happening. And even to Bond's point, like we talk to nonprofit teams and their boards, right? We're investment advisors that work with nonprofits. We're in their finances, we're in their reserves and cash management. We go through boards. Well, guess what? The CFO is the one doing it. And often there's a huge disconnect between the people receiving stocks and managing the funds and looking at the books, and then the board who's actually making those decisions. I literally talked to one nonprofit the other day, and I was talking to one of the board members on the investment committee, and I mentioned the name of the person who was the director of finance. And I was like, oh, well, I've been talking to so-and-so, and they were like, who is that? I don't even know who that is. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, let me introduce you to. Y'all need to know each other, right? And that's not my job, but I was happy to do that. So you have to look at, I think, for leadership, accountability, transparency, and communication on every single level. How can you empower those people? How can you be transparent and accountable about those responsibilities and kind of that mission and vision and whatever level and whatever category they're in, making sure that everyone feels cared for and has an opportunity to grow.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. Bill, over to you. How important is leadership development and what strategies can be implemented to empower leaders?
Well, I come from the stratosphere and bring it down to the congregational level. Most churches have a finance team. And the general culture of most finance teams that I know of, and I've been doing this professionally for 40 years, is that they're the gatekeepers. Their job is to say no. Their job is to say we can't afford it. Their job is to make sure we stay within the budget. And I get it. I mean, we have assets that we have to protect, which I hate that word. But I get that. The problem is that really shouldn't be the role of the finance team. The finance team's job should be really about how do we make sure the money is there to do the ministry that the church is commissioned, founded on, missional and vision focused to do. How do we make sure the money is there? And that goes back to what everyone else here on the panel has said. It's about getting people trained, getting people to have a new vision, to conversation and cooperation, et cetera. And instead of the finance team saying we can't afford it, in fact, they should never, ever, ever say that. What should come out of their mouth is, how can we afford it? It changes the question. It changes the culture from gatekeeping to, all right, if this is a good thing, if it's chasing the mission of the church, and it's pursuing the vision, is within our values, then if it's a good thing, how do we make that happen? What do we have to change? What do we have to stop? How do we have to raise money? Is there a grant available? Are there people we could ask, people who could underwrite it? It reframes the question so that the church can move forward in ministry. And, when it comes to leadership development, start there. I'll start with the pastor, because the pastor's got to figure this out. But the bottom line is that we have to put on or create a new culture for our leadership, to not from, gatekeeping, to seeing possibilities, seeing the vision, and making sure that we can get there. We've got to think bigger than bake sales and start thinking things like estate planning and grants and et cetera. We've got to get past our, the little mindset of so many churches of protectionism instead of reaching out.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. All right. This is the last of my questions before opening it up to our wonderful audience. But before I open that door, I want to sneak in my next question. And Karen, I'm going to have you start us off with this one. What innovative approaches can faith-based organizations take to leverage technology and digital platforms in their fundraising efforts? And how can they overcome resistance to change within their communities?
Great question. This is a little softball for me, because this is what we do. But at Infinite Giving, we provide the only donation platform that is completely inclusive of all methods of giving. So we have one place where, yes, you can do one-time recurring, cash, credit, debit, ACH, Google Pay, Apple Pay, Cash App, all those. But we also open your brokerage account, and we streamline your stock donations, and we open a crypto wallet, and we receive crypto. So it's stock, crypto, donor advised fund grants, endowment gifts, as well as cash. So we're opening up those accounts. We're sending your donation receipts. We're liquidating immediately, putting it as cash into your bank account. And we're doing all that with a fiduciary partner. So I think too often, even just the idea, over 90% of nonprofits are unbrokered, meaning they don't have a brokerage account. And the reason that's important is because a brokerage account is what allows you to make some money off your money in a low risk, highly liquid way. It also allows you to receive stock gifts, right? So you can foster 62 relationships with people who are going to give you an average online cash gift of $128. Or you can foster one donor who may give you a stock gift. This averages $8,000. The right answer is you have to foster relationships with all of them, right? But if you're not easily making the high capacity gifts also accessible, so we do that in one place, takes about 20 minutes to set it up. You do have to have board approval, right? Because we're doing financial transactions, but it's really affordable. And so I think too often we think it's too complicated and too hard, because it kind of has been. But now you have a lot of technology and a lot of partners that you can invite in. The problem is that sometimes new things cost money, right? And then to hold Bill's idea of not like, we can't do that. That's $50 a month. We can't do that. Or you can say, well, how can we do that? And is it worth it? And how can we build this into our strategy, right? Because people want to help, right? So our whole goal is to making it the most affordable all-in-one option. And there's other ways to do that too. But I think leveraging technology, especially to grow asset giving and really streamline it, is super important. Even if you have a brokerage account, there's a lot of pain points. I was just talking to a church here in Atlanta, and they're like, no, we have a brokerage account. It's fine. We get like 15 stock donations a year. It's all fine. Well, the executive pastor reached out to me like 2 months later, and he was like, Karen, is this what you guys saw? And they had all these stock gifts come in, and names were not attached to them. They didn't know which congregant it came from. And there was this massive sorting of data, and then members are mad because they didn't get thanked and they didn't know who it came through. So just know that a lot of those pain points that can come with some of the bigger gifts is also starting to be streamlined and automated to take away those pain points. So people are actively trying to make it easier for you, and those resources are available at infiniteGiving.com.
Thanks, Karen. All right, Linda, over to you. Thoughts on innovative approaches to take to leverage tech and fundraising efforts, and any tips to overcome resistance?
Yes, I think it's important to take advantage of the online portals when you are searching for grants, to know which organizations are currently providing grant funding for your ministry, whether it's the foundation directory online, which is typically free. If you go to the library, you can get free access. Grant Watch or Grant Station, these portals provide you with the information that you need to know where you should be going to seek funding for your ministries. But again, there's a need to educate the faith-based community so that they understand that yes, there are grants for you, and then the next step is to be able to find that perfect funder, that is willing to provide resources for your ministry. Again, part of what I do, I have an online grant writing course where I teach faith-based communities and many other communities, how to go about telling their story, right, in a grant narrative, so that organizations want to be able to give them funding. But I think taking advantage of the numerous grant portals that are available is key, and it's not expensive. Again, many of these portals are available free of charge if you go to your library, but even if you subscribe to them, they're very economical. But yes, there needs to be an understanding that there's free grant money available to the faith-based community.
Thanks, Linda. Bill, you're up next. Any advice on innovative approaches to leverage tech and how to overcome resistance?
Well, in terms of resistance, the pandemic was horrible for our nation. On the other hand, it had a good effect on the church in terms of technology. That the church came out by and large, the church came out of the 19th century, came into the 20th century. Online giving, electronic giving, video, and all the rest seem to have come to the forefront. And so, a lot of that resistance has already been eroded, and we need as a church to continue on that path. There's this sense in which I find in most churches, again, goes back to the whole tawdriness of talking about giving, is that we stop talking about, hey, we have electronic giving options. And so we put a QR code in our bulletin or on the back of our pews or something, but it never gets mentioned that, we mention it in, the subtext, but we don't talk about subscription giving, you're giving every week, et cetera, or every month, whatever it is. We let that ball drop in so many cases because, we're a small church. We don't need to keep telling them. Well, if you don't keep telling them, they won't respond. And more seniors, the younger you are, the less resistance you have to deal with. But the more and more seniors are moving into online giving, electronic giving. They're paying their bills by used to be pay by phone. They're paying it with apps. They're paying it, on their phone, et cetera. And the church just needs to step up and keep that in front of them. As Karen said, having or making it easy to give. And we don't as a church, by and large. I mean, we're still passing the plates thinking that people are carrying checkbooks and they have cash in their hands. Not so much. And so, we've got to continue to look at the tools that are out there, expand our horizons. And again, as Karen said, to make it as easy as possible to give. Because if you have to cross the street, to give, if you have to sign in and do 14 steps, people just go, yeah, whatever. And they're 2 clicks and they're gone. So I don't know about innovative ways. The innovation's out there. We've just got to help move our people into it. And we do that by talking about it and making it easy for them to participate.
Thanks, Bill. All right, over to you, Bond. Any additional thoughts on innovative approaches to leverage tech and how to overcome resistance?
Yeah, I want to shift towards more of the delivery of the impact and communicating that impact to audiences. I have a very recent example of this. A client I work with, an international NGO, they have fundraising offices in about 20 different countries and program delivery offices in about 60 different countries. And they've long used kind of like the reporter in the field model, where they've got somebody on staff working with the program delivery offices local. A lot of times it's somebody who is from that local community who's been trained in recording videos, writing stories related to that. And they've used this model for quite some time just to deliver that information back to a donor who may be funding a program specifically in the field. But one of the things that they're doing now, they're working towards a global campaign, and they've got a child maternal health program. And they actually used survey data that they had sent out to constituents in a bunch of different support offices, so a bunch of different countries, to gauge what specific topics these donors and supporters were most interested in, and to gauge how close these individuals felt to the organization. And realistically, you're dealing with a whole lot of different logistics when you're dealing with multiple countries, right? Different currencies, different fundraising databases. But these sorts of questions, which of the topics, where we're providing service, are you most passionate about? And how close do you feel aligned with the mission of the organization? And they used that to send invites for this virtual event on maternal and child health, for a new maternity ward that they'd opened in one of the countries where they provide service. And people were able to attend that from anywhere. And it was made available in a bunch of different languages. And I thought that was really neat. Now, obviously, there's a lot of like production value that goes into putting something like that on. But trying to answer the question of how do we communicate impact in a location that's really far away from where our donor constituency might be, and how do we communicate impact across a variety of cultures? I really think that technology is allowing us to do that in ways that are accessible to more people. I mean, they were able to show pictures of what the maternity ward looked like before, which is basically just like a bench in the middle of nowhere, to a streamlined, new, technologically equipped facility. And, just allowing people to see that firsthand is, you can't get better than that in terms of showing this is what we're able to do because of your generosity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bond. All right, I want to make sure we get to Rob's question in the chat as well. How do you feel about churches or organizations focused on doing fundraisers instead of focused on raising funds? Anyone want to jump in, answer that question for Rob?
All right, I'll take the first swing at
Thank
it.
you, Bill.
I think the most effective way to help a church begin to shift their practices and changing the culture is to start looking at the results. And we don't talk about results, not really in the big picture. We'll say, wow, our bake sale brought in $500. Isn't that great? Well, okay, that's nice. On the other hand, our stock funds brought in that last week. Et cetera. And there's a lot of work involved in a lot of these events. We have to talk about the results in the big picture, and do comparisons, probably not from the pulpit, but do comparisons with our finance team and our board, and say, look at the resources we expanded in terms of time and energy, marketing, et cetera, and how we could have probably done so much better if we had done X, Y, Z, whatever, in terms of funding. Fundraisers are blips in our budget, and they also do something else that it depending on how we do the fundraiser. But most church fundraisers are focused on trying to get the community members to write checks to us for our ministry. And the church already has a reputation in our culture as being money hungry, greedy. All we talk about is money. All we want is their money, et cetera. We want you to join our church so you can pay our bills. No one ever says that. And yet there's a subtext in our culture that kind of feels that way. And every time we do this big fundraiser, our spaghetti feeds, our pizza feeds, our bake sales, our rummage sales, we tell the community, hey, you're right. That's what we're all about. We're all about getting your money to fund our ministry. And it's about, we're trading some sort of goods, our junk or our chocolate chip cookies, whatever, for your bucks, instead of saying, look how we are transforming our community. Look at what we could do. And we just we have the tendency with fundraising to just prove the culture right, that we're all about the money, and not talk about the good the church is doing. And that's really needs to be our on-point message. And when we are on-point message with the results-based and the vision and the mission and making difference in people's lives, people will give a lot more generously, not a lot more regularly than they will when we're selling chocolate chip cookies and pound cake.
All right.
I'd
Thank you
love
so
to
much,
add.
Bill.
Can
Yeah,
I add
go
something too?
ahead, Vaughn.
Awesome. Events come up a lot in philanthropy, and I think they serve two really key purposes. One is acquisition. If you want to get a whole new audience of people to learn about your organization and donate, and then you're going to do something with that. You're going to start sending them mailings or include them in any sort of targeted online fundraising efforts. Communicate to them, send them your newsletter, and in kind of PR or community branding, getting your name out there. Which, I mean, both of those are kind of flip sides of the same coin, right? Like, we want to get exposed to a broader community. Events, really, I think we've created a misnomer in the industry by referring to them as fundraising events. I mean, I would love to have a goal that fundraising events break even, but I think by and large, with the exception of certain kind of paddle raise events where we've already actually like prompted, we know these 15 people are going to raise their hand and pledge $75,000 for this project because we talked to them before. That's relational fundraising. It's just staged relational fundraising. It has a purpose, but I wouldn't call that a fundraising event. That's like a fundraising script. So I think if we think of events as these ways to build our network, build our community, they serve a really good purpose. But, plus one to everything Bill said, they just take up a lot of time, a lot of budget. The ROI is not there if you're thinking you're going to make money out of these.
Thanks, Bond. Unbelievably, the hour is going by so quickly, and we have reached the end of our panel. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights today. I also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something that will benefit the work that you do on a daily basis. We have a packed summer of panels ahead of us, and I hope you will join us for them. So keep an eye out on the NXUnite website or on the NXUnite LinkedIn page to make sure you don't miss out on any of these. All right, that is it for me. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a nice rest of your day. Bye, everyone.